Good morning, everyone. My name is Alma Marquez, and I am the Executive Director at WELL, Water Education for Latino Leaders. On behalf of our founder and board president, Victor Griego, and I, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's WELL webinar. Time is running out. More than 100 communities are about to be left holding the bag on tainted water. WELL's mission is to educate local Latino elected officials on California water policies to promote timely and equitable actions that strive to develop a robust economy, healthy communities, and a resilient environment for all Californians. Due to COVID, we have transitioned to take our programs online. This is the second in a series of educational webinars. The WELL team is excited to bring you even more webinars this year that will have relevant and timely topics. One of these events is the WELL Fall Virtual Conference titled Climate Change and Political Climate Impacting California Water. This will take place on Friday, November 13th from 10 to 2 p.m. What you will learn is water infrastructure, smart growth, water scarcity, groundwater policies, and water planning and politics. You will see the flyer and the registration on your screen. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us directly. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy morning to join us. I want to recognize all of our participants who have registered from throughout the state, as far north as Calistoga and as far south as San Diego. Next, I would like to introduce today's moderator, Adan Ortega. Adan is the president at Adan Ortega Associates, who serves a select group of Fortune 500 companies, large public agencies, and not-for-profit organizations on public policy and organizational matters related to communication challenges, governance issues, and crisis management. Adan is a noted expert in subjects about water, air, agriculture, public accountability, and community empowerment from local to the national levels. He is currently a board member at the Metropolitan Water District, where he was appointed to represent the city of Fullerton. But most importantly, he is a friend of WELL. Now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Adan Ortega on to our virtual stage.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Alma, for that gracious introduction. I want to thank WELL for organizing this webinar. It's very timely, and I think our goal is to prevent hundreds of communities from being left holding the bag on the cost of 123 TCP treatment. We have a great panel for you today. The panelists will walk us through 2 case studies and then an overview of what's going on with 123 TCP and how it is that you can address these issues in your community. So I want to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Councilmember Olivia Trujillo. She comes to us from the city of Arvin in the Central Valley. She has been part of that community for over 50 years. She's committed to improving the lives of families in that community, which has various challenges related to water quality. She's been active in the Chamber of Commerce and many other civic organizations. She herself is a cancer survivor and brings her personal experience and knowledge to bear on the topic of 123 TCP. She was elected to the City Council in 2018. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Councilmember Olivia Trujillo. Please take it away. Oh, one more thing, I'm sorry. For those of you that are listening, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A button on the top of your screen. Please type your questions and I'll do my best to forward the questions to the speakers at the conclusion of all the comments. So again, without any further delay, Councilmember Trujillo, please.
Thank you very much and good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for being here and joining this beautiful event that we're having to bring awareness more than anything. I will start with 1962. I immigrated from Mexico in 1962 into our beautiful city of Arvin. At that time, I want to let you know that our water was amazingly sweet. I want you to imagine how sweet it was, the way I'm describing it, because we could run around, in the backyard, play, water games or just spray each other with the water hoses, drink the water and enjoy it. Unfortunately, as time has gone on, things have been changing. But at that time, people would say, including my mom, people who drink water from Arvin always come back to Arvin. And you know what? That is a true fact, because no matter where anybody has been, I always see them coming back to Arvin for one thing or another. In 1978, however, I got married and moved to Highland Park. So in Highland Park, as a newlywed, there was a lot of things going on. And of course, I was blessed with 3 beautiful daughters. And so during their summer vacations, guess what? They would always look forward to going to grandma's house, my mom, but they always celebrated, we're going to grandma's house. They even made a song about it. It was so exciting. I never feared for their safety. I knew they were at a safe place, and water was never on my mind as far as, you know, was it going to be safe or not? Never touched in my head. I knew that they were going to be okay. I was now free to sell, you know, pots and pans, the business I married into in 78. And unfortunately in 1990, things changed. And I came back to Arvin with my daughters until 1998. At that time, I noticed the water wasn't as sweet, but I didn't question anything. I just noticed that it was now a little bit milky. It was coming out milky. It wasn't coming out clear. And I did tell my mom, I said, "Ma, ¿qué está pasando? And what's happening?" And she would say, "Oh, no, don't worry about it. It's just arsenic." But they said it's not dangerous. All we have to do is boil it. And we have to boil the beans and the potatoes anyway. How else are we going to eat them? So don't worry about it. She would jump on her tricycle and, you know, drive it to the local, you know, a water dispensary here in Arvin to chug home a 5-gallon bottle of water. And she says, "This is for drinking. No te preocupes, everything's going to be okay. No problem. It's just arsenic. And besides, we're not going to drink it." And now, as you know, beans, potatoes are being boiled with our beautiful arsenic water. And again, no problem. That's the way that people were seeing the issue here. A lot of different things happened. During the 70s, we had a strong migration of people from Nuevo León, and they were migrant workers moving through. So they didn't really stay a whole lot. It was just following the grape season and move on. The people that were here all the time were, that came in from the Dust Bowl era, from Oklahoma. So it was no big deal. Okay, moving forward. Since 1978, I started moving in and out of Arvin for looking for job opportunities or better opportunities that were not offered in Arvin. And in 2010, I was in the Bay Area and I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So a day I will never forget, January 5th, 2010. On that day, I called my mom, and I didn't let up on my mom until she went to go get checked. I told her, "Mom, cancer doesn't hurt until it's too late. Please go get checked, please." So the following month in February, I asked her, I said, Mom, how did it go?" She goes, "How do you think it went?" "I'm full of cancer just like you. Me va a llevar la chingada." You know, life is gonna, you know, and I told her, no, we'll get through this together. Don't worry about it. What I didn't know, it was stage 4 endometrial cancer, and that was huge. It was alarming. I couldn't think anymore. I couldn't stay in the Bay Area anymore. I raced back to become my mom's caretaker and see what I could do about her situation. March 3rd of the same year, 2010, I went in and had my surgery. I had a bilateral mastectomy, and on the 8th of March, the same, you know, following week, I made myself back to Arvin because I needed to be my mom's caretaker. I'll never forget it. I came to Arvin with the 2 drains under my both armpits to make sure that my mom's blood pressure was under control and she was going to be okay. Everything was going to be fine. What I didn't know is that my mom did not want any kind of aggressive treatment, and therefore they gave her only 6 months to live. She didn't want chemo, she didn't want radiation, she didn't want anything. She says, no, God sent me whole and I'm gonna go the same way. I don't need to, lose anything else. Okay, I've already had my surgery, I'm done. She had her surgery on March 29th. Same month, same year, and they gave her 6 months at that point. They put her on hospice and she didn't care. I was bombarded by all these things. By the way, she lasted 2.5 years. I lost her in June of 2012. And in order for me to deal with the depression and the loneliness of not having her in my life anymore, my daughters were all grown. I was pretty much alone in the beautiful city of Arvin, now caring for a 90-plus-year-old sister-in-law. And I got really involved, and I joined the local chamber here, Chamber of Commerce, and I just needed to stay busy. While I was on the chamber, one of the council members, local council member here, appointed me a planning commissioner. That was my first leadership role, now community-based leadership role, that I could say that I was sitting up there and seeing what I could do for the community. I was faced with, of course, some of the planning issues was the oil and gas industry coming into Arvin to drill. I will mention Jerry Tinoco was also on the planning commission. Why I mentioned Jerry is because he had lost 5 family members to cancer here in the beautiful city of Arvin. So having graduated from Arvin High School, he went on to UCLA. He started exploring chemist career and testing water and seeing what could be done. But he didn't tell anyone. He just did what he did, graduated from UCLA and came back to Arvin and got hired by our Arvin district. And he didn't tell anyone why he was doing it, but he came specifically to test the water here in Arvin. And when he did, now that he was hired with the water district, he had samples and he himself took them to Sacramento and brought, the big, people that are always testing water and seeing whether the cities are in compliance or not. That time, it was found that our water was tainted with TCP 123. It was huge. It was a big scandal. Oh my gosh, that's dangerous. It's a cancer-causing agent. And here I've been growing up since '62 and the water was sweet. But I did notice in '98 when I told my mom that the water was not looking as clean, it was, milky and it was, tainted. She said it was just arsenic, no big deal, no problem, it's okay. Well, that's the same attitude that all the city, all the community spoke about. Oh, it's just arsenic. Whenever I found that out, it was a huge cancer-causing agent. I put all the numbers together, it was not a coincidence. So whenever the oil and gas industry came in, when I was a planning commissioner, they wanted to come in and drill. Jerry says, look, it's oil fracking. They can do it maybe if it's 400 feet away from the nearest house, church, school, a business, 400 feet away, make sure it's landscaped, and they have to leave at least a good, chunk of change, as a bond to secure money here in case. And we only gave them 1 year to test and see if the water was, if they were going to find oil or not. After a year, they had to move their stuff out, leave everything as was, and the money that was left as a bond was to clean up whatever residue or contaminants that were there. Right now, as we are moving forward, I saw that it didn't matter what I decided to do. The council now was the one that was making other decisions. So they allowed the oil and gas industry to come in, but they put 300 feet of the policy where they could drill. Long story short, I saw I wasn't doing anything, so I ran for council. And as a council member, then I said I can make other decisions. and do other things. So I joined the League of Cities. I went to the conference for the well. I was graciously accepted into the well program, this fellowship that has opened up my eyes to new things. I've been bringing resources to our city to see how we can, manage things. I was able to attend Legislative Action Day, and $25,000 is not a bunch of money, but it was money that the water district could not use to start up another well when the other two contaminated wells were shut down. And again, it's not a whole lot, but it's something. And now that I see things that are going on, I've been very close to the water district, and I was told that Arvin is now compliant. It was out of compliance for over 5 years, but Arvin is now compliant. The TCP is supposedly, clear, gone. And they did shut down the wells completely and opened up new ones. 16 and 17 wells were opened. But again, the manager said they still cannot go public and say that, the water is safe to drink. They cannot do that and count the chickens before they're hatched. Because again, they're waiting for more tests to be run. What does that say? That say that we're still having a problem and they're not being transparent or clear about it because there's still fear there. So people are, still, carrying water to their homes and doing whatever they can to use drinking water. Now, what are they saying? We're not using it to drink. We're not drinking in it. But guess what? They bathe in it. They cook their food in it. They do everything. They wash their vegetables in it. They do everything. So the same thing that happened back in the 90s when my mom said it's no big deal. We need it for cooking our beans and our potatoes. It's still happening now, right now, 2020. It is not okay that things are happening like this. I know for a fact that there isn't a fund here in our city to care for the people now. In 2017, I was diagnosed with metastatic bone disease. I thought I was on the clear, but guess what? I went to my oncologist and he told me, you know what, Olivia? I'm overwhelmed by so many cancer patients in the Arvin, Lamont, Wasco, McKettrick area. He says, suffering from cancer in the kidney, cancer in the liver, cancer, just all kinds of cancers. And now you, Olivia, I don't understand what's going on. And that's when it all clicked. It all clicked. I say, you know what? It is not a coincidence. Thank you very much for saying that, because I came back and I said, now I have to do something about it. I was able to see a lot of things by going to travel to different cities through the WELL program, ask the right questions, talk to the right people. And now I am honored to be here on this informational webinar. And I plead whoever is going to be here on the panel to tell us what we can do, how we can bring resources to our city, and I can be able to share this with our community. Thank you very much. It's been such a pleasure being part of this amazing webinar, and let's do something.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Trujillo, for your very compelling and personal story that led to leadership and, of course, partnerships with so many across the state. Next, I'd like to introduce Councilmember Diana Mahmood of the City of South Pasadena. Councilmember Mahmood was elected to the South Pasadena City Council in November of 2013. She's the 8th woman to serve on the City Council, and with her election, 2 women simultaneously serve on the City Council for only the 2nd time in the city's history. On December 16th of 2015, Councilmember Diana Mahmood was elected to serve as mayor during the 2015-2016 term. She's a UCLA graduate with a law degree from UC Davis. Councilmember Mahmood is a water and energy expert who retired from the Metropolitan Water District. And if you go to WELL Conference, you'll see her in various panels and discussion groups and as a featured speaker. But her city has been impacted by 123 TCP, and she's going to lead us through the decision-making process in the city of South Pasadena. So please, Councilmember Mahmood.
Thank you so much, Adan, and I am going now to my presentation that I have prepared. Okay, so how my city addressed 123 TCP compliance. My city was incorporated in 1888, and actually you can see my background is a store that was built at about that time, as well as a watering trough that dates from about that same period. We're a population of 26,000 in 3.5 square miles. We're located just south of the city of Pasadena and about 9 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles, but we're in a fully built out urban area. Fortunately, we own and operate our own retail water utility to serve our residents and businesses. In the 20s, there were 3 separate private water companies that served water to our residents and businesses, and the city acquired them at that time. We have 4 wells, 5 reservoirs, 2 tanks, and about 70 miles of distribution pipes. Because of the age of our city and its infrastructure, we commenced about 10 years ago a capital improvement program through which we are slowly upgrading our aged facilities, starting with our reservoirs. Pursuant to a stipulated judgment, the city is fortunate to enjoy pumping rights to water from the main San Gabriel Basin, which is a huge aquifer that allows for percolation of water fairly easily from the surface. And the city obtains almost all of its water supply from that aquifer. I might mention that we have 3 of our 4 wells and 2 reservoirs located outside of the city of South Pasadena, because the city is on the edge of the aquifer. So if you think of a bowl of water, literally we're at the edge of the bowl. It was much easier to, the aquifer is actually much deeper in areas just immediately to our east. And so we have 3 wells in the city of San Gabriel, as well as 1 reservoir and a well and a reservoir in the city of San Marino. And we believe that all of our wells are located in former agricultural areas. Prior to the establishment of a TCP maximum contaminant level, or MCL, as I will refer to it during this presentation, our city water generally met applicable water quality requirements. But when it didn't, city applied 100% chlorine wellhead treatment. The city is also fortunate in having a direct connection to MWD's distribution system, and we are a member agency of the Upper San Gabriel Valley Municipal Water District, and through them, a sub-agency of MWD. So what is 1,2,3-TCP? Well, it was an ingredient in soil fumigants widely used in agriculture for decades. It was also used as an industrial solvent and for degreasing. It moves to groundwater with little absorption in the soil. And unfortunately, it stays in the groundwater. Once it's there, it doesn't go anywhere. It's believed to be a carcinogen, and unfortunately, if you drink water that is contaminated with TCP, the body absorbs much or all of the TCP. It can also be inhaled. Some studies show long-term exposure can cause liver and kidney damage. And as I said, it does not go away naturally, at least during our lifetime. Despite all of the above, there is no federal MCL for TCP 123. However, US EPA requires that it be monitored. So in 2001, the California State Water Resources Control Board started monitoring for TCP, as I'll refer to it. And from 2001 to 2015, it found that 471 wells in the state were reporting TCP in the groundwater, with detectable limits ranging widely from 5 parts per trillion to 10,000 parts per trillion. Not surprisingly, most reporting wells and the highest locations of TCP were located in the Central Valley. And you can see there, I won't repeat the levels, but Los Angeles also appears, and I believe that the appearance of Los Angeles goes back to decades and decades before, when there was far more widespread agricultural use in our area. In 2016, the state board started holding stakeholder meetings and a public workshop. In 2017, it held public comment, a public hearing in April, and then in July of 2017, the state board adopted a 5 parts per trillion maximum contaminant level. Although the state intended for that level to be effective prior to December of 2017, it wasn't approved by the Office of Administrative Law until that date. And pursuant to the regulation that was approved, retail water suppliers are required to sample quarterly for each source which is identified as having contained MCL beginning in 2018. Now, it's important at this point to note that California is only one of 3 states that has an MCL for TCP. At the time that California established its level, Hawaii's MCL was at 600 parts per trillion, or 120 times higher. Subsequent to California's adoption of an MCL, New Jersey adopted one at 30 parts per trillion, or 6 times higher than California. Notably, the 5 part per trillion level is the level at which TCP is detectable in water quality labs. So it's a very conservative level. So what were South Pasadena's TCP treatment options? Well, as you heard me say, we have old infrastructure, and unfortunately, only 2 of our 4 wells were working at the time. And at the time of the regulations adoption, one registered TCP at 19 parts per trillion, the other at 40, but obviously both out of compliance. So the state board identified options for a well that exceed the MCL. The first, provide treatment. Granulated activated charcoal is a very well-known, widely prescribed system for addressing water quality. However, it takes time to design and construct. And there was less than 6 months from the time that we were notified of the date of the level at which the state board adopted the TCP regulation to the time that it became effective. Another option was to drill a new well, as you heard Councilwoman Trujillo identify. However, in an adjudicated basin, such as the main San Gabriel Basin, that is not really feasible. As you can imagine, the pumping rights are highly regulated. Everybody watches what everybody else does. And it would require approval from the water master, and I just don't think that approval would have been forthcoming. Additionally, we could remove the well from use. However, that would have left our city with no source of water other than from MWD at significantly higher cost. Basically, it would have been the cost of MWD's latest procured water. We could purchase water from a nearby utility, and again, that utility would be MWD, feasible but at high cost. We could consolidate with a nearby larger water system, but that would take forever to negotiate, even if it was feasible. And then finally, we could blend contaminated water with the clean source to reduce overall concentrations below 5 parts per trillion. And for us, this was feasible only with purchased water. I would note at this point that it was my impression that the state board was rather cavalier in identifying that, well, they didn't think that their establishment of such a conservative level for retail water suppliers would result in significant costs, because they figured, well, you could just get water from another well, as was done in Arvin. However, in a densely concentrated urban area, particularly one where the local aquifer is an adjudicated water basin, it is very difficult to accomplish. So what did South Pasadena do? Well, in November of 2017, knowing that the regulation had been established and our wells were out of compliance, we awarded a design contract for design of the granulated activated charcoal system. Also, that same month, the Public Works Director and I flew up to Sacramento to meet with senior state board staff to request a compliance extension to no avail. Had we done nothing, we would have had to report to our residents and businesses that our water did not meet applicable water quality requirements, something we had never before been required to do, and we were loath to start doing so now. So, in February of 2018, staff commenced preparation of a blending plan combining MWD purchased water at significant cost at 95% and our local groundwater at 5%. In March of that year, the State Division of Drinking Water approved our blending plan and amended the city's drinking water permit to reflect the same. So the city commenced implementation of that plan. Little did we know the nightmare that was about to ensue. So what was our nightmare? Well, in April of 2018, our residents began to report discolored water coming from their faucets, and we got 39 calls. In May of 2018, we hired a consultant to investigate the cause of the discolored water and to recommend mitigation measures. And we got 63 calls. And because of the reported concerns of our residents, we started sending water collected from homes to water quality labs. And the water basically appeared as the water in the glass to your right. And I have to say, it was one of the most uncomfortable times for me sitting on city council. I very vividly remember having a young mother who was pregnant at the time who came up and said, I have a toddler at home, I'm pregnant, and this is the color of the water that is coming out of my faucet. And it looked pretty much like the water that you see in the glass. It was extremely uncomfortable. So in June of 2018, the city awarded a $2.7 million contract for installation of a permanent and a portable GAC system. Yet we continued to receive calls. We continued testing of our home collected water samples, which continued through November. In July, staff continued to respond to calls, although they started the decline that had started the month before. And the Division of Drinking Water approved installation of a breakpoint chlorination system to address discolored water. That was something that was recommended by our consultant. And we discovered that the reason why our residents started receiving the discolored water is that MWD treats its water with chloramines, which is a combination of chlorine and ammonia. This was found to have provoked a chemical reaction in galvanized pipes, which eventually loosened accumulated rust that was in the pipes and then transported that into the water faucets. Through testing, the city verified that the water met all water quality requirements, even though the appearance strongly suggested otherwise. I'll also mention that we were able to tell our residents and businesses that if they ran the water for several minutes, that the water would eventually clear after all of the dislodged rust particles had run through their system. But obviously, that's not what you want to have to tell your residents to do. We also had reported calls from residents about discoloration in their sinks and bathtubs from the rust. So we start to be on the road to MCL compliance. In August of 2018, the breakpoint chlorination system, which essentially simply added additional chlorine, reduced water discoloration and the number of our calls to 13. Also at that time, fortunately, the San Gabriel Basin Water Quality Governmental Agency awarded us a grant, slightly less than $600,000, to assist us in paying for the cost of our wellhead GAC installation. Thankfully, in September, the calls reduced to 7. In October, we commenced testing of our portable GAC system and were able, based upon the results of that testing, to increase groundwater production from our aquifer such that we could provide 20% of our delivered water from our local groundwater. And we received no further calls regarding discolored water. In November, the Division of Drinking Water approved formally our temporary GAC system. In December, we were able to cease purchase of MWD water. In February, the installation by our construction contractor of the permanent system was completed. And then finally, in May, the Division of Drinking Water approved our drinking water permit amendment. So, what are our next steps? This was an expensive exercise. Our total cost of compliance was just slightly, it was around $6 million. And just to give you an idea of the magnitude, for last fiscal year, our total annual water revenue was just slightly north of $10 million. So this was a huge cost to us. Our costs included the cost of preparation of a blending plan, GAC system design and installation for both the portable and the permanent system, purchase of MWD water, again at very significant cost, customer engagement regarding the discolored water, and all of the water quality testing from our home collected samples, and finally the cost of installation of the breakpoint chlorination installation and chemicals. We have hired outside counsel to seek reimbursement from those we believe are responsible for the existence of TCP in our groundwater supply. Not surprisingly, Dow Chemical and Shell Chemical Company, again, due to what we believe is the use of the area where our wells are located for agricultural purposes. We hope to hold these companies accountable. Thank you so much for your attention. That concludes my presentation, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Mahmoud. That was very, very informative. Again, I'd like to remind the viewers that if you have any questions, you can post them on the Q&A, which is on the top of your screen. Next, I'd like to introduce our expert. His name is Ken Sansone. He's the partner at SL Environmental Law in San Francisco. He focuses his practice on complex environmental matters, and he has over 2 decades of experience in handling very sophisticated civil and criminal litigation cases. Prior to that, Ken served as Assistant Attorney General in the state of New Hampshire, where he represented state officials, agencies, and employees, and the state itself on a wide range of disputes. He received his law degree from New York University School of Law and his bachelor's degree, graduating magna cum laude at with the highest distinction at Duke University. So please welcome Ken Sansone, who's going to walk us through some details of how you get active and address these issues if you find them in your community. So Ken.
Thank you very much, Adon, for that introduction, and thank you to everybody at WELL for putting this program together today. I have a presentation that I would like to share with you to talk about how, hearing the stories of Councilwoman Trujillo and Councilwoman Mahmoud about how these contaminants have affected their communities, brings out a lot of emotions. It brings out anger, I think, It brings out fear, and it brings out a feeling of helplessness, that communities, particularly underserved communities, are sort of at the mercy of big industries that have manufactured products and supported industries that have caused the contamination of the groundwater with dangerous chemicals, carcinogenic chemicals. And what I would like to talk about is a way that the legal process, the way that our system of justice can be used to take those feelings of helplessness and turn them into empowerment, and really turn them into action. Action, the result of which can be the shifting of the responsibility for this contamination to the corporations who are responsible for it, and the shifting of the costs of cleaning up that contamination, which Councilwoman Mahmood just went through some of that with you in her community, can be substantial. Shifting those costs back to the corporations who are responsible for causing that contamination. This is just a little bit about my background, and Adon went into it already, but I'm the leader of our 123 TCP practice at SL Environmental Law Group. Our practice is limited to representing communities, and that ranges all the way from entire states to small mutual water systems in groundwater contamination cases. A fun fact about me, I was on Jeopardy! This says I was a champion. I won one game, so that still counts. What do we believe at SL Environmental? Well, I think it's the same thing that everybody who's listening to this right now, and everybody who's involved with an organization like WELL believes, and that's everyone should have access to clean water at a fair price. And of course, that is much easier said than done, particularly in California, particularly in this day and age. There are so many challenges and pressures that elected officials and the other people who are responsible for running these water systems face in ensuring that the water is clean and that the water is fairly priced to the people who live in these communities. And one of those challenges, as we've been talking about today, are man-made contaminants that are regulated by the state. The water's not clean, and something needs to be done about it. What I want to talk about, as I mentioned at the beginning, is using the legal process to ensure that the corporations who are responsible for contaminating groundwater in communities with their products are the ones who pay to clean it up, rather than the people who live in those communities. What I want to talk to you about today is a legal theory, a legal doctrine, a set of legal rules, which is called strict products liability. And what the legal doctrine of strict products liability establishes is that the manufacturer of a defective product is responsible financially for the harm the product causes. This is a good example. This is a quote from a court case, and it's a very typical way that a court would articulate the idea, the doctrine of strict products liability. And it's a very simple concept, which is rooted in an idea of justice that I think everybody can understand and appreciate. And that's the burden from dangerous products should be placed upon those who profit from their production, rather than being imposed exclusively on the innocent victim. And again, this is a pretty old idea at this point. Courts started to think about products and product manufacturers this way with the rise of industrial society and really the rise of consumer products in the 1940s and 1950s. And this statement of the law here is the law everywhere in the United States, in every state, including California. And here's a simple example that I think explains why this rule makes sense. You go out and you buy yourself a new laptop. You can see that there. You take the laptop back to your house and you start losing it. The laptop bursts into flames and it burns down your house. Well, I think all of us would expect that if we were unfortunate enough to be victimized by something like this, that the company that made that laptop, the company that got our money for buying that laptop, would be the person responsible for the damage to our house, would be the person responsible for building us a new house because their dangerous product caused that damage. It's pretty obvious, but unfortunately, that's not the way that a lot of water suppliers think about the situation, which is identical, where someone else's product caused damage to their supplies. A lot of times, suppliers shrug those things off as simply one of the costs, one of the challenges of running a water system. And ultimately, that cost gets passed on to their consumers, to their ratepayers. And it just shouldn't be that way. And under the law, it doesn't have to be that way. So let's talk a little more about how the legal doctrine of product liability works. So this is a very simple statement of the rule. You can see at the bottom there that this comes from a case that was decided by the California Supreme Court back in 2018. But again, this is a very old idea that's been stated by the California Supreme Court many times over the past century or so. And the rule is that a manufacturer is liable if a defect in the manufacture or design of its product causes injury while the product is being used in a reasonably foreseeable way. And what I'd like to do here is unpack that a little bit and explain what this means and how it applies in the case of products that cause groundwater contamination in California and elsewhere. So what does it mean when we say that a product has a defect or a product is defective? Well, under California law, it can mean one of two things. It can mean that a product did not perform the way consumers expected it would, or really the more relevant idea that we'll be talking about here is the risks of the product's design outweigh the benefits of the design. And the reason we're talking about that is we're going to be talking about some sophisticated products that are not really used by ordinary consumers, so they don't really have expectations about how these would work or perform. So we're going to be talking about products that are defective because the risks of the design outweigh the benefits of the design. In other words, those products were just designed in a way that makes them too risky. And these are two of the products that we'll be talking about. So 1,2,3-trichloropropane, or TCP, you've already heard a lot about today. Councilwoman Mahmood's summary of what that chemical is was terrific. And where that chemical came from. Well, that chemical, in most places where it's been found in the groundwater and contamination, got there as a result of soil fumigant products that were used in agriculture. And you can see a picture of one of those. This actually comes from an advertisement from Shell Oil Company. Its product was known as DD. These products were used by injecting them into the ground where they would vaporize. And you can see that's actually depicted in this picture from the advertisement. These were called the underground fog. And what these highly toxic chemicals did was kill microscopic pests, particularly nematodes, microscopic worms that would live in the soil and attack the plants. But these products contained, as a result of their manufacture at the Shell and Dow chemical plants, 1,2,3-TCP as a byproduct. 1,2,3-TCP was not the constituent in the product that had the nematicidal effect, was not the constituent in the product that had anything to do with killing those worms. It just happened to be left over from when they made these products at their refineries. PFAS, the second substance described here. Some of you may have heard about that. It's been in the news a lot lately. PFAS was in a number of consumer products and industrial products that were used from the 1950s well into the 2000s. A couple popular ones were Teflon, depicted by these pans, and Scotchgard, which we all know as a carpet stain resistant product. And it was also present in firefighting foam that was used at airports and military installations. And some of you who run water systems may have gotten orders from the state to test for PFAS compounds. There were many, many different ones. So far, California does not have an MCL for any of these, but most of us expect that there will be within less than 2 years. And again, the state's already ordered testing and developed action and notification levels for some of the more commonly found PFAS substances. Again, these are also man-made contaminants that got into the groundwater as the result of defective products. And we'll talk about that more specifically now. So we talked about the test for when a product is defective, and let's talk about these soil fumigants that contain TCP. Well, do these cause harm when used as intended? Well, they do. We talked about this already. They were intended to be used by injecting them into the soil. When that happens, the TCP that contaminated the products ended up going down into the groundwater. Councilwoman Mahmood mentioned this. TCP does not degrade when it gets into the natural environment. It persists. And so it persisted and made its way down into the groundwater underneath all the fields and orchards where it was used. So that was the harm, groundwater and contamination caused by the use of the product as designed. There are very few cases where this got into the groundwater as a result of these products being illegally dumped or accidentally spilled or anything like that. They got in there because they were used by farmers as the farmers were told to use them. The harm is caused by the defect. Why are these products defective? I mentioned this because they contain TCP. TCP does nothing to make them effective. And TCP is the contaminant that lasts in the environment. So that means they satisfy this test for being a defective product. And the risk outweighs the benefits. Again, it's kind of the same idea here. The TCP has no benefit in terms of what the product is designed to do, and that's kill these pests. Instead, having the TCP in the product just ensures that it gets into the groundwater where it stays there. So the bottom line here is that these soil fumigant products, DD by Shell and Dow's product was called Telone, are defective products. And so people who are harmed by them can sue, and the harm that was caused is the responsibility of the manufacturers of these products. We're really talking about TCP today, but I just want to go through these products with PFAS real quickly because, again, it's something that's been in the news a lot and you've probably heard about. Same idea here. When these products were used, and particularly we can talk about the firefighting foam, it was used not only to put out fires, but to practice putting out fires. It was sprayed all over the ground. The PFAS that was present in these products got into the groundwater, and PFAS, like TCP, once it gets into the environment, it does not degrade. These are actually called forever chemicals, these PFAS chemicals. And so that's the harm, the groundwater and environmental contamination that having this PFAS in these products caused. Again, that was a defect in the product. There were other substances that could have done the trick of PFAS in these products that cause less severe or no environmental effects. And having these forever chemicals in there in a way that they could get introduced into the environment is a very significant risk that was outweighed by any benefit. So we talked about the manufacturer being responsible for the harm that its product caused. And I think that this chart here, or this graph, illustrates why that makes sense. And it illustrates the approach that my firm and other firms take in these cases. So if you look here, you have profit and resources on one axis and awareness of risk on another. And we can talk about some of the different companies that are in the distribution or use chain for these products and where they fit. So here you have an end user. And in the case of these fumigants that were contaminated with TCP, that would be the farmers who use these. These farmers didn't know at all, had no idea that these products contained TCP. As I mentioned, they just used them as directed. And individual farmers, of course, don't have the same kind of resources that the companies that made these products do. So they're on sort of the bottom left here. If we go up the chain a little bit, we have a distributor. A distributor is in a better position to know about the products it sells, whether they have defects or design features that could make them dangerous. And usually they're bigger companies than the farms that were using these products. But all the way up here, we have the manufacturer. The manufacturer was the one who knew what was in these products. And again, the manufacturers of these fumigants that had TCP, Dow and Shell, there's plenty of evidence that's been developed over the years that these cases have been done, that they were aware that the TCP in their products was dangerous to human health and also dangerous to the environment. And of course, companies like Shell and Dow are enormous companies that have made billions and billions of dollars selling chemicals and engaging in other activities over the years. And so they're in the best position, really, to pay for the harm that their products caused. And we've talked about this already. Who are the manufacturers? Well, Dow and Shell when it comes to the soil fumigants. When it comes to PFAS, companies DuPont and Chemours, again, these are enormous corporations that have made billions of dollars off of products like this over the years, and I'm sure everybody's heard of them. So this idea of suing the manufacturers when their products cause groundwater contamination, it's not something that I made up. It's not something that just was made up, but it's something that my firm helped pioneer back about 15 years ago when environmental concerns started to be raised over a gasoline additive known as MTBE. Some of you may have had experiences with that. My firm represented the city of New York and later the state of New Hampshire in cases over MTBE contamination. Those resulted in large verdicts against the manufacturers of the gasoline that contained the additives. And the difference in this approach is that in the past, if you had groundwater contamination caused by gasoline that was leaking out of underground storage tanks at a nearby gas station, you would sue the gas station owner. And again, just if we can go back here, the gas station owner is all the way down on the bottom left here. They don't have the resources to pay to clean up groundwater contamination, and they didn't know about the MTBE in these products. So we went after the manufacturers of the gasoline, and the results were good. And TCP cases, I've mentioned those. These have been going on for about 12 years. And there have been dozens of settlements and verdicts that have caused Dow and Shell to pay money to clean up for the TCP contamination that their products caused. What kind of costs are we talking about? Well, again, you've heard a little bit about of the city of South Pasadena's experience. If you have TCP in your wells and you have to shut them off, oftentimes you have to make up that supply by purchasing from other sources. That can be enormously expensive and cause other problems, as you heard Councilwoman Mahmood tell us about. Drilling new wells is an option for some communities, not all. Some communities in agricultural areas, the TCP contamination is going to be widespread because these products were very popular and they were used all over fields and orchards. So there's really not a lot of places you could drill to escape the scope of the contamination, but it's something worth looking into in some places anyway. Constructing treatment facilities and operating and maintaining those facilities, those are really going to be the way that most communities have to deal with those. GAC, granulator activated carbon treatment, is the best available technology according to the State Water Board. Those are very expensive systems that consist of big steel tanks filled with charcoal. They cost millions of dollars in most instances, depending on the size. And they're also very expensive to maintain. The charcoal needs to be changed out and disposed of. So these are the kinds of costs that were caused by the products, caused by the contamination that can be recovered in these lawsuits. So bringing a lawsuit is not something that most people want to get involved in. Let's face it. You know, particularly elected officials who are used to defending lawsuits that are brought against their municipalities or their communities as they exercise their functions. Everybody experiences those from time to time. But of course, these are lawsuits that are actually brought by the city to try to, again, shift the costs where they belong. There's always concern that lawsuits are expensive. The reality is in these cases that firms like mine and other firms that do these work on contingency fee agreements where they are only paid a fee if and when there's some recovery from the defendants. So the municipality or the community doesn't have to go out of its pocket to pay the expenses. The expenses of bringing the lawsuit, things like expert witness fees, depositions, and the like, those are typically advanced by the law firm as well. So it costs the municipality nothing out of pocket. And that is really important because the whole point of doing this is to try to get funds to pay for the treatment. There's some concern that, well, if we bring a lawsuit over what's in our groundwater, everyone's going to start asking us questions about what's in our groundwater and why haven't you done anything about this earlier. What we found, what our clients have found, is that there isn't negative public perception, that people in the community realize that lawsuits like this help protect public resources. That groundwater in the community belongs to the community by and large. And when somebody has contaminated it, they need to be held accountable. And usually what we find is communities like to see their leaders doing just that. Lawsuits are burdensome. There's always concern about we have to, go through all these documents. We have to sit for depositions. Having an experienced law firm help you with this can really reduce those burdens. Again, this isn't reinventing the wheel here. These lawsuits have been around. They follow a pretty typical pattern, and if handled by experienced counsel, the burden on communities and on the people who run the water systems can really be reduced. This last one I talked about, particularly in agricultural communities, there's a concern that, well, if we're suing over an agricultural contaminant, are we blaming the farmers? And the answer is no. We talked about this already. The farmers did not know, and the firefighters who were using the foam that had PFAS in it did not know that these products would cause groundwater contamination. Only the manufacturers knew that. So the farmers and firefighters and other businesses who may have used these products are left out of the lawsuits. The lawsuits are between the city or the water system and the manufacturer. So I think this is the big topic of discussion for today. Time is running out. Swift action is crucial here. And here are some of the reasons why. But the most important reason is really at the end, the statute of limitations. We already talked about how taking action against polluters can make the community happy with its elected officials. The converse is also true. Not doing anything in response to contamination is likely to be poorly perceived. When you're suing a manufacturer whose products have caused such widespread contamination, it's always best to do it sooner rather than later because, there's going to be a long line of people lined up trying to get justice. And it's always better to be early to the party than late to the party there. And statute of limitations and statute of repose are a couple concepts that I want to talk about in a little more detail. So the statute of limitations is a time limit that applies to any kind of claim that can be brought in court. And it is just an absolute and arbitrary time limit that cuts off your right to recovery. So it is a very dangerous weapon out there that can hurt communities, but can be used very effectively by the polluters. When we're talking about the statute of limitations and groundwater contamination claims, it's important to remember these points. One, the clock can start long before treatment begins. So usually the hardest part in figuring out the statute of limitations is, okay, well, I know I have 3 years, and generally in California, your time frame is going to be 3 years. Well, 3 years from when? And that gets to be the tricky part. Well, that 3 years can start long before you actually have a treatment plant up and running. Generally, the rule is that once a system takes some action in response to the presence of a contaminant, then the clock starts to run. So some systems will shut off wells, some systems will try to start blending, although with TCP it's difficult because the MCL is so low, as we've been talking about. And generally those kinds of things can start the clock. And it's a little bit counterintuitive, right? Because treatment hasn't started yet. The lawsuit is about treatment costs, but the clock can run even before treatment starts. Another common misconception is, well, we're going to have continuing damages. Even if we build a treatment plant, we're going to be running it for 40 years. These chemicals are going to be around for a very long time. So maybe we miss out on some of the money we spent in the past, but we can still recover the money that we spent in the future. And if you miss the statute of limitations, the answer to that is no, you can't. You're going to be completely cut off from any recovery, even future treatment costs. So again, what's the bottom line here? These statutes, these time limits are great for corporations that cause pollution. They're terrible for water suppliers and the communities that they serve, because they take a claim which is otherwise valid and would result in recovery, and they make it worthless just because of the passage of time. And this is just a little bit about my law firm, SL Environmental, and our extensive experience in handling these cases, as I mentioned, particularly in federal court, which is where, for example, we're handling the case for the city of South Pasadena. We believe that we can get faster and better outcomes in federal court where that forum is available. And with that, I'll stop and turn it back over to Adon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. That was very informative. And I guess I wanted to ask you a question. There are questions coming in. First of all, so you said it could be that some folks are late on TCP because of the statute of limitations. Where are we on PFAS? Is it still early?
Well, it's early. That's an excellent question. Thanks, Don. It's still early on PFAS relative to TCP, but a couple points. It's never too early. I think when it comes to PFAS, most of us see the writing on the wall. There are going to be MCLs for PFAS compounds in California. There are MCLs already in several northeastern states. There are already action levels and notification levels. We all know that those are the preludes to MCLs in California. We've seen this movie before. There actually is already a movie about PFAS, in fact, which is only going to increase the pressure to have drinking water standards. And so systems that have gotten these testing orders, that have tested, that have found PFAS, they may have taken any number of actions in response. And one of them is to turn off wells that are affected. Because if they have it over the notification level, they don't want to notify anybody, which is understandable and a perfectly legitimate way to run your system well. Doing that is going to start the clock. And these testing orders started to come out last summer already, so it's already been 15 months. The time goes fast. So our advice is always, there is nothing to be gained by waiting. Always better to be. You can't be too early. So I was going to say it's better to be early than late, but you really can't be early.
So Ken, are any efforts being made to increase the statute of limitations? This is a question that just came in. Is that possible?
Well, I might throw that back to you, Adon, because you're very aware of what's going on with these issues up in Sacramento, more so than me. I'm not aware of anything. I don't know if you are. No. And it's, I guess I could respond with an analogy there. It's very difficult to increase statute of limitations once they're set. Obviously, these companies are very well represented by lobbyists. And they're not about to let that happen because they realize, as I've talked about, how powerful this can be in helping them evade responsibility. And I think probably the most high-profile effort to increase statute of limitations had to do with sexual assault cases And in New York, for example, there was a huge legislative fight over that. Again, it seems like the fairest and easiest thing in the world to give people who were assaulted when they were children enough time to bring lawsuits now. But even that was in serious doubt. So I wouldn't count on it.
Okay, so we have a question here for Diana, and this probably applies to Councilmember Trujillo. Sorry, I should have said Councilmember Mahmoud, because Councilmember Mahmoud and I used to be colleagues, so I got used to calling her. So I apologize for that.
No worries, Ivan.
So Councilmember, how did you deal with the outrage of residents who don't like the water's look and also don't want to pay the increased cost? I assume that there were water rate increases perhaps associated with some of this. So how did you handle the outrage that the community felt over higher water rates perhaps and the colored water?
We had previously increased our water rates just before this happened. We anticipated we'd have to pay something. We didn't know the cost due to the prior testing that we had done. But obviously our residents were extremely upset, those that had galvanized pipes. The interesting thing is that it appeared that there was a definite cause and effect. And as I said, my city was established in 1888. And as some of you may know, we have a lot of older craftsman homes. And my home, in fact, was built in 1913. And for those homeowners or renters that were living in homes that had not replaced galvanized pipes with copper pipes, they were the ones that experienced the problem. So if you had replaced your pipes, you didn't have a problem. So that enabled us to say, well, it's not so much the city's fault, because if you had copper piping, then you wouldn't have a problem. But also with regard to the rate increases, and I have to say, as I mentioned at the outset, we have been undergoing the capital improvement program for over 10 years, and we have steadily increased our rates to the point that, unfortunately, I think they are probably currently among the highest in our region. But at the same time, we have implemented, and I'm very proud to say this, as some of you may know, under Prop 26, you cannot use water revenue to subsidize water rates for low-income residents. And so we have established a low-income discount using general fund money to do that. The criteria for eligibility is the same as used by the CPUC in making available, and this is the irony, the CPUC has mandated that their regulated retail water providers have low-income rates, but we as public entities can't do it from our water revenue. We've got to do it from general fund. But that's one thing. We do have that. Secondly, when we undertook a rate redesign in 2011, I think it was, first of all, we implemented tier rates to promote conservation. We previously had a single unit rate for sale of water, but we also added a 15-cent per 100 cubic foot, which is the unit of sale on a retail basis for water conservation. And we use that to supplement and enhance existing MWD rebates, as well as develop some of our own. One of the things that I'm very proud of is that one of our public works people suggested, and this is particularly important in light of all of our enlightenment with regard to stormwater, we will pay our residents to take out hardscape and replace it with a permeable surface. In addition, for example, when MWD temporarily removed a rebate for its turf installation, we still had ours, and we still have now a supplement to MWD. So we have a very aggressive water conservation program, and hope that that helps to assuage what would otherwise be a lot of concern with regard to the rates.
That's very smart. Councilmember Trujillo, the city of Arvin does not run its water department. There's a water district that operates and delivers water to your residents. What happened there when water rates went up? Did the city council help defend the water district? Was there outrage? How did that evolve?
So absolutely not. So the water district is a separate entity. The council has nothing to do with whatever the rates they're charging. I'm hearing from the residents, the outrage, they went from $11 of usage to 22 to 33 and without any explanation. And so, just to have use of water coming to your house is $33 aside from the water that you use. So the council has nothing to do with it at all.
Interesting. So there's a question here, and I think it could be for Council Member Mahmood and also for Ken. And that is filing a suit against Shell and Dow. Are they not already pursued by the San Gabriel Valley Water Quality Authority? Are you suing outside of their claim for damages?
Well, I'll let Ken speak to the specifics, but I will say the Water Authority does not have any standing to sue for our damages. I related the specific damages that the city has incurred. Certainly they could, the Water Authority could sue for the $589,000 that they gave us, but we have damages that are $6 million and counting, because as Ken pointed out, we are going to have to replace our charcoal for the duration of that system. So we have damages now that are specific to the city of South Pasadena. And I would assume that if there is an existing lawsuit, which frankly I was unaware of before, that the defendants would seek to consolidate our action with that existing action. Ken, can you provide any more specific information?
Yeah, I can, and that's an excellent question. Now, these kinds of lawsuits that are over the widespread use of these products that cause the contamination are different from, I think, the experience that a lot of folks have with environmental litigation. You know, these are not like, say, a lawsuit over a Superfund site where all of the contamination came from one site and has sort of spread in a plume outward from there. And you have a number of communities who are affected by the spread of that plume suing the companies that were responsible for what was happening on that site. So you don't really have an opportunity for regional action, regional legal action in these cases. You know, what you have again is communities that had wells that were located near the fields where the products were used. And, you know, not the case in South Pasadena, which has been suburbanized for a while, but out in a place like Arvin, which is still an important agricultural contributor, obviously. Those fields were everywhere, and they are everywhere in the community. So it's really got to be handled on a community by community basis. And it's a great question, because I think there's a little bit of a tendency for local systems to say, well, you know, we're just going to let someone else handle this, you know, like somebody else handled lawsuits over contamination from a Superfund site at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And there really isn't anybody else to handle it. And these damages are localized, as you just heard Councilwoman Mahmood explain.
So here's a good follow-up question from the audience. The city of Richmond will be considering working with the Center for Sustainable Economy to pass an ordinance to require risk bonds that would require all industries to hold bonds to pay for any issue that impacts the health of the community in which they're located. Does this address this kind of issue with TCP or PFAS?
You know, that is an interesting concept and a new concept. To me, I've never heard of any other source of funds for these kinds of damages. And it's a question that I get a lot. You know, typically these are not going to be covered by any sort of property insurance policy, for example. But again, any sort of creative thinking that can be employed to help out here, I think should be explored, because the scope of the problem is enormous. I don't think anyone cited the statistic yet. It was in some of the materials, promotional materials for this today, but there are over 100 systems in California that are out of compliance with TCP that have not taken any legal action yet. And the cost of that cleanup is going to be extraordinarily significant. And I think state efforts to provide funding for that have been way, way below where they need to be. So again, if you're affected by this, you need to think about shifting the cost back to the polluters.
Here's a good
And
question. Go ahead.
Ivan, I might also add, I used to be a public works lawyer. I think it would be very unlikely that Richmond would be able to find a surety that would provide a bond that would be effective except on a prospective basis. I would be very surprised if you could find an insurance company that's willing to assume the risk for past acts or past damage.
Okay. Well, here's a good question coming from the Central Valley, and that's how can council members keep on top of testing and upgrades that are essential for the safe consumption of water, especially in rural agricultural communities surrounded by fields? Councilmember Trujillo, I thought that was a good one for you.
My goal is to stay connected and follow up with our water district and keep being vigilant about these things, because it's not something that now that I see, it's not just the oil and gas industries, but all these other contaminants that are coming in from the pesticides in the fields. And listening to Ken, thank you so much for your presentation. It was amazing. And the thing that I was not aware of, I've learned more about, is that it's not the farmers' faults. It's not their fault. It's not the gas station attendant, the owners of the gas stations. It's not their fault, and they should not be held accountable for these things. So by staying on top of it, by being vigilant, taking continual leadership roles, and I want to add, my goal is to bring awareness to our community where the people can form committees. There's power in numbers, and ask the right questions, and attend the water board meetings and ask these kind of questions. I think that would be one of the biggest ways of staying on top of it.
Yeah, I want to add, Water Education for Latino Leaders was created for the reason that this question was asked, that there's council members, and some councils are also acting as water board members for their municipal utility, while there's other city councils that don't have a water municipal utility, and there's water districts and companies around them. So WELL is a vehicle that's created in order to keep council members aware of these kinds of issues, which is why we're having this webinar today on TCP, why we might probably have another webinar in the not too distant future about PFAS now that the state has expanded the orders for testing on that. And it's things that hopefully city council members can stay on top of through WELL. So I encourage everybody out there that is curious about these issues and how to stay on top of them to check in with WELL, because WELL does a good job of spanning not just the big issues, but also these issues that impact communities. So I think we have time. Let's see, we're almost at the end of the session. And so I just wanted to ask one more question to all of the panelists, and that is, if you had the chance to do anything differently with regards to 123 TCP, what would it be? So let's begin with the council member Trujillo.
If I had the opportunity to make changes, first of all, I would have been more informed. I would have encouraged people to seek information, but information on what if they were oblivion to the chemical, the cancer-causing agent, all these things. If you're not involved, if you're not seeing what's going on, you don't know what questions to ask or who to go to. So I would have approached it in a more informative way, and that way I could be more a better advocate for our community. So yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other regrets, Ken? That Councilmember Mahmood?
Oh, you know, it's often stated the solution to pollution is dilution, and I think that is thoroughly embraced by the State Water Board. But as my city's experience vividly demonstrates, there are also sometimes very dramatic and adverse ramifications of that. And I think had I known that blending MWD water would have resulted in the public relations nightmare that my public works department experienced, as well as city council, I would have done a much better job of advising the state board that there are adverse ramifications, and you can't simply assume that you can blend water without adverse consequences.
So Ken, quickly, I have about 1 minute.
Yeah, let me, I just want to follow up on that. And I think that with 123 TCP, a very low MCL, and again, the widespread use, which has been discontinued, by the way. They don't use these products anymore. They haven't since the late 1990s, when they were discontinued because of concerns over groundwater contamination. Blending and drilling new wells are not going to be realistic options for hardly any communities. And so I hear that a lot too. Well, we'll think about maybe bringing a lawsuit once we figure out exactly how we're going to deal with this. And, you know, probably when you start, you hire a consulting engineer to figure out how you're going to deal with it. Probably the answer is going to be you need to build a GAC treatment plan. That's going to be expensive, and really, rather than figuring out a way to get people in your community to come up with an extra, you know, $20 a month on their water bills, those costs should be put on the manufacturers.
Okay, so thank you. I want to thank the panel. I also want to thank Well, and I want to hand this back to Alma. Alma, please close, if you can please close the webinar with final details. Oh, we can't hear you.
Thank you, Adan.
Okay.
And distinguished panelists, your expertise and experience was truly highlighted in today's webinar, and thank you participants for your questions that created a rich discussion. I want to give a special acknowledgement to Councilwoman Diana Mahmood, who is also a WELL board member, and Councilwoman Trujillo, who is a recent graduate from the WELL Untapped Fellowship Program. Thank you for the valuable information you shared today. And last but not least, I want to thank today's sponsors, SL Environment and AARP. AARP has been a supporter of WELL since 2017. Without your support, this webinar would not have been made possible. And with WELL, we have a tradition where we pin people who are part of our programs and part of everything that we do here at WELL. So I have a pin that we usually give out to all of our sponsors, and I'm showing it here. And I'm gonna make sure that, Ken, you get one today for your presentation and all the great work that you do at SL Environment. And in closing, I want to invite you all again to attend the WELL Fall Virtual Conference on Friday, November 13th. The registration link is in your chat box, so you can get in there now and register. And here's the flyer. We are also still accepting sponsorships for the November conference and upcoming webinars. You can find that link also in your chat box. We have recorded today's webinar and will be posted on our website for your reference and sent to you for those of you who have registered. Thank you all again, and be well.